He'd spent millions on famous doctors. None got the diagnosis right, but the nanny he almost didn't hire saw what everyone else missed. What she found changed everything. Clarice hopped off the bus with her beat-up old suitcase in hand and checked the address on the crumpled piece of paper. The number matched, but she had to double-check 3 times because she simply couldn't believe her eyes. Behind the wrought iron gate stood the biggest mansion she'd ever seen in her life, a palace of glass and marble that looked straight out of an international architecture magazine. She adjusted her brown hair, pulled back in a makeshift bun, and took a deep breath. At 32, she'd worked in many homes, looked after plenty of kids, but she'd never set foot in a place like this. The agency had called the day before, saying a businessman urgently needed a nanny with experience in special needs children. The salary on offer was 5 times higher than any job she'd ever had. Clarice pressed the intercom button and waited. A woman's voice, dry and formal, responded after a few seconds. "Yes, good morning. It's Clarice Mendez. I'm here for the nanny interview." There was a pause, a little too long. Clarice's stomach tightened, imagining she might have gotten the address wrong, or the time, or that they'd already found someone else. But then the gate began to open with a mechanical hum. "You can come in. Follow the main path to the front door." The garden was immense, with perfectly manicured flower beds and a marble fountain in the center. Clarice walked slowly, taking in every detail. She'd grown up in a 2-room house in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, sharing a bedroom with 3 sisters. She'd never imagined people lived like this. The front door opened before she could even ring the bell. A woman with grey hair pulled back in a severe bun scrutinized her from head to toe, with eyes that seemed to catalogue every flaw. "I'm Mrs. Elsa, the housekeeper. Mr. Fernando is waiting in the study." Clarice nodded and followed the woman down a marble corridor. The walls were decorated with paintings that probably cost more than everything Clarice owned. Her worn shoes made an embarrassing scuffing sound against the polished floor. Mrs. Elsa stopped in front of a dark wooden door and knocked twice. "Mr. Fernando, the candidate has arrived. Come in." The voice was deep, tired. Clarice entered the study and saw a man sitting behind an imposing desk, surrounded by piles of papers and medical files. Fernando Almeida was 38, but looked at least 10 years older. Deep bags under his eyes marked his face, and there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested many sleepless nights. He looked up and studied her for a moment. Clarice felt like she was being evaluated, a piece on a chessboard. "Please, have a seat." She obeyed, placing her suitcase on the floor beside the chair. "The agency tells me you have experience with sick children." "Yes, sir. I worked for 3 years with a girl who had cerebral palsy. Before that, I looked after a boy with severe autism for 2 years." "And why did you leave those jobs?" "The girl went to a specialized institution when her mother moved overseas. The boy..." Clarice paused, feeling the familiar knot in her throat. "The boy passed away. Heart complications." Fernando watched her more closely. There was something different in his gaze now, a shadow of recognition. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thank you. It was hard, but I learned a lot from him. I learned to pay attention to details, to the small changes that sometimes doctors don't notice." Fernando leaned back in his chair and ran a hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion that seemed automatic. "I'll be straight with you, Clarice. Over the last 2 years, I've spent over $3 million on doctors and specialists, tests, treatments. My sons, Miguel and Rafael, are 5 years old. They're twins, and they're sick." Clarice leaned forward, listening intently. "No doctor can figure out what's wrong with them. It started about 1.5 years ago. Extreme fatigue, muscle aches, concentration problems, weight loss. We've done every imaginable test. We've consulted specialists in Sydney, Melbourne, even flew them to London and the States. No one knows what it is, and the symptoms are slowly getting worse. At first, they thought it was anemia, then suspected an autoimmune syndrome. We did bone marrow biopsies, MRIs, genetic tests, all inconclusive." Clarice processed the information in silence. Something about the story didn't quite make sense, but she couldn't pinpoint what. "Where is the children's mother?" Fernando's expression closed off like a locked door. "Beatriz passed away 2 years ago. Car accident. The boys were 3. I'm so sorry, Mr. Fernando. The symptoms started about 6 months after her death." He paused for a long time. "The doctors say it might be psychosomatic, that they're manifesting their grief through their bodies, but I don't believe it. Something is wrong with my sons, and I will find out what it is, even if I have to spend every last cent I have." Just then, the study door opened, and a man in a white lab coat entered without knocking. He was about 50, with graying hair combed back, carrying a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than Clarice's monthly salary. "Fernando, we need to talk about the latest panel results." The doctor stopped when he saw Clarice. "Who's this?" "Dr. Otavio. This is Clarice. She's interviewing for the nanny position." The doctor scrutinized her with a look that made Clarice feel like an insect under a magnifying glass. "Another nanny? Fernando? We've talked about this. What your sons need is specialized medical care, not another housemaid playing nurse." Clarice felt the blood rush to her face, but she kept her composure. "I have certification in first aid and pediatric care, doctor." Dr. Otavio let out a short, disdainful laugh. "Very impressive certification. And where did you study medicine? Some local college?" "Otavio." Fernando's voice held a warning tone. "I'm just being realistic. You've hired 5 nannies in the last year, Fernando. None lasted more than 2 months. Your sons need health professionals, not people who will panic at the first emergency." Clarice stood up. She didn't know where the courage came from, but the words came out before she could stop them. "With all due respect, Doctor, how long have you been treating these children?" "Doctor," Otavio narrowed his eyes. "Over a year. And in that time, have you managed to discover what's wrong with them?" The silence that followed was deafening. Fernando looked from one to the other, clearly surprised by Clarice's boldness. "Listen here, young lady Clarice." She didn't back down. "My name is Clarice, and I'm not saying I know more than you. I'm just saying that sometimes a different pair of eyes can see things others have missed. Not because they're smarter, but because they're looking from another angle." Dr. Otavio scoffed and turned to Fernando. "You are not hiring this woman." Fernando remained silent for a long moment, looking at Clarice with an expression she couldn't decipher. Then he stood up. "Clarice, I'd like you to meet my sons." "Fernando, this is absurd." "Otavio, you can go. We'll discuss the results later." The doctor stormed out, slamming the door harder than necessary. Fernando walked over to Clarice, and for the first time since she arrived, offered something resembling a smile. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. I've only got experience being underestimated, sir. After a while, you learn not to take it lying down." They went up a marble staircase to the second floor. The corridor was decorated with family photos, and Clarice noticed a smiling blonde woman in several of them, hugging 2 identical babies. Beatriz, the mother the boys had lost. Fernando stopped in front of a light blue door. They're resting. Lately, they spend most of the day in bed. No energy to play, run, do kid things. He opened the door slowly. The room was enormous, with 2 single beds, separated by a bedside table covered in medicines. The walls had cloud-patterned wallpaper, and toys were scattered on the floor, but all looked untouched for a long time. In the beds, 2 identical blonde boys lay covered up to their chins, despite the warmth. They were too small for 5-year-olds, too thin, too pale. One was asleep. The other looked at the door with large, tired eyes. "Daddy?" "Hi, my love. I've brought someone for you to meet." Clarice approached slowly, sitting in a chair beside the awake boy's bed. "Hi, what's your name?" The boy studied her with the natural distrust of children who'd seen many adults come and go in their lives. "Rafael. That's Miguel. He's sleeping." "Nice to meet you, Rafael. I'm Clarice. Are you a doctor?" "No, I'm a nanny." Rafael frowned. "A nanny? Like, to look after us?" "That's right. The other nannies left. They didn't like staying here." "Why do you think that?" Rafael shrugged, a small, tired gesture. "Dunno. I guess we're too much trouble. We're always tired and can't play properly." Clarice felt her heart ache. 5 years old, and this boy had already learned to blame himself for being sick. "Rafael, can I tell you a secret?" The boy nodded, his eyes a little more interested. "I'm not going anywhere." "Why not?" "Because I like kids who are trouble. They're the most interesting." Rafael managed something like a smile, the first Clarice had seen on his face. "You're weird. Thank you. That's a compliment." In the other bed, Miguel began to stir. He slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the light, and looked at Clarice with confusion. "Who are you?" "I'm Clarice. I came to meet you." Miguel didn't answer, just stared at her with a blank expression that made Clarice realize this twin was different from his brother, more withdrawn, more fragile, more affected by the illness. Fernando watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" Clarice stood up and walked over to him, speaking softly so the boys wouldn't hear. "They need more than medicine, Mr. Fernando. They need someone who's present, who observes, who pays attention to the small things. And you'd be that person?" Clarice looked at the 2 boys, so small in those huge beds, and felt something stir in her chest. The same feeling she'd had when she met the autistic boy who eventually died in her arms. The feeling that these children needed her. I'd like to try. Fernando studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. You start tomorrow, Mrs. Elsa will show you your room. Clarice shook his hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Mrs. Elsa appeared at the door as if summoned by telepathy. I'll show you to your room, miss. Clarice followed the housekeeper down the corridor, passing more closed doors, more expensive paintings, more evidence of wealth she'd never seen up close. Her room was at the end of the corridor, near the boys' room. Here it is, Mrs. Elsa opened the door, revealing a simple but comfortable room with a single bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a window overlooking the garden. The bathroom is the second door on the left. Breakfast is served at 7. Mr. Fernando dines at 8, but the boys eat earlier, at 6. Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Elsa. The housekeeper hesitated at the door, as if wanting to say something more. Clarice waited. Miss Clarice, you can just call me Clarice. The other nannies, they didn't leave because the children were trouble. Mrs. Elsa lowered her voice. They left because this house is sad, and because Dr. Ottavio made their lives impossible. Why are you telling me this? Mrs. Elsa studied her for a moment, and Clarice saw something soften in her stern expression. Because you looked at those boys the right way. Before Clarice could answer, the housekeeper had left, closing the door behind her. Clarice sat on the bed and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. Somewhere in that mansion, 2 5-year-old boys lay in their beds, too weak to play. She thought about everything she'd seen. The desperate father, the arrogant doctor, the housekeeper who seemed to know more than she let on, and the twins, so small and fragile. She didn't know what was wrong with those boys, but something in her gut told her the answer was right there in that house, hidden in plain sight, and she was determined to find it, no matter the cost. Clarice's first week in the mansion was a constant exercise in observation. She'd wake at 6 a.m., even before Mrs. Elsa, and spend a few minutes in silence, absorbing the sounds and smells of the house. There was something there she couldn't identify, a persistent feeling that something was wrong beyond the boy's illness. The twins woke around 7, always exhausted, always complaining of aches. Clarice noticed that symptoms seemed worse in the morning and improved slightly throughout the day. Raphael, do you want to have breakfast outside today? The boy looked at her with surprise. Outside? In the garden, under that big tree. Raphael hesitated, looking at his brother in the other bed. Miguel won't want to. He doesn't like leaving his room. Clarice approached Miguel's bed. The boy was awake, but kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Miguel, do you want to have breakfast in the garden? No. Clarice didn't insist, but made a mental note. Miguel was significantly worse than Raphael. After breakfast, Dr. Ottavio arrived for his daily visit. Clarice was in the boys' room, helping Raphael with a simple jigsaw puzzle when the doctor entered without knocking. How are the patients today? The same, Clarice replied without looking up from the puzzle. Dr. Ottavio ignored her and went straight to Miguel's bed, pulling a stethoscope from his lab coat pocket. Let's see how this heart is doing, champ. Miguel didn't respond. He let the doctor examine him with the passivity of someone who'd been examined hundreds of times with no results. Heart rate's a bit elevated, Dr. Ottavio murmured to himself. I'll order another blood panel. Doctor, Clarice said, can I ask a question? Go on. The boy's symptoms seem worse in the morning and improve when they leave the room. Have you considered there might be something in the environment causing this, doctor? Ottavio looked at her as if she'd suggested the earth was flat. Miss Clarice, I studied medicine for 8 years and have practiced for over 20. I've considered every possible hypothesis, including environmental factors. The house has been tested for mold, asbestos, lead, radon, all negative. What about the cleaning products? What? The cleaning products. Some can cause reactions in sensitive children, especially if used frequently in enclosed spaces. Doctor. Ottavio let out a short laugh. Cleaning products. Of course. Why didn't I, with all my years of experience and all the specialists we've consulted, think of something so obvious? He turned to her with an expression of pure disdain. Miss, I understand you want to help, but leave medicine to the doctors. Your job is to look after the children, not diagnose them. Clarice felt her face burn, but kept her voice firm. I was just making an observation. Well, keep your observations to yourself. Dr. Ottavio closed his briefcase and headed for the door. I'll speak to Mr. Fernando about the new blood panel. When he left, Raphael looked at Clarice with a curious expression. Why doesn't he like you? I don't know, my love. Some people don't like it when others ask questions. Mummy used to say questions are important. She said, "That's how we learn new things." Clarice felt a pang in her chest. "Your mummy was right. Did you know she died?" The question came so directly, so unfiltered, that Clarice needed a moment to respond. "Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I miss her too." Raphael returned his attention to the puzzle. "Sometimes I forget she died. Then I remember, and I get sad again. It's normal to feel that way. Miguel doesn't talk about her. He gets angry when I do." Clarice looked at the other bed, where Miguel lay with his back to them. Everyone deals with sadness differently. Does sadness make you sick? The question was both simple and profound, and Clarice didn't know how to answer immediately. Sometimes it can, but not always. Dr. Otavio said we're sick because of sadness, but I don't believe it. I'm not that sad. Clarice absorbed that information. So the doctor really believed the symptoms were psychosomatic. But something about that theory didn't make sense. 5-year-old children could manifest physical symptoms from emotional stress, but usually not so severely and prolonged. That afternoon, while the boys were napping, Clarice decided to explore the house. She told Mrs. Elsa she was looking for the library, but in truth, she wanted to better understand the environment where the children lived. The mansion was enormous, with 3 floors and over 20 rooms. Clarice explored each of them carefully, noticing details most people would ignore. The carpets were cleaned daily. The windows rarely opened. The air conditioning system ran all the time, recycling the same air throughout the house. When she reached the cleaning product storage in the basement, she found something that caught her eye. There were dozens of bottles of a specific product, an industrial disinfectant she'd never seen before. The label read, "Formula Clean Pro, Professional Use." Clarice picked up one of the bottles and read the ingredients. Most were chemicals she didn't recognize, but one jumped out, glutaraldehyde. She vaguely remembered reading something about that substance years ago when she worked in the hospital. It was used to sterilize medical equipment, but could cause respiratory and neurological problems with prolonged exposure. "Can I help you with something?" Clarice turned and found Mrs. Elsa standing in the doorway of the storage room, arms crossed. "I was looking for the library and got lost. The library is on the 2nd floor. This is the basement." Clarice put the bottle back on the shelf. "Sorry, this house is very big." Mrs. Elsa didn't seem convinced, but said nothing. She just guided her back to the stairs. "Miss Clarice, a word of advice. Mr. Fernando is a very private man. He doesn't like people who ask too many questions or go where they haven't been invited. Understood? And Dr. Otavio?" Mrs. Elsa hesitated. "He has a lot of power in this house. Mr. Fernando trusts him completely. If you cross him, you won't last long here. Thanks for the warning." "It's not a warning, it's a fact." That night, Clarice couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the cleaning product, the boys' symptoms, how everything worsened in the morning and improved when they left the room. There was a connection there. She was sure, but she needed more information before making any accusations. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual and went to the boys' room before the cleaning staff arrived. The smell was subtle, but unmistakable. The same industrial disinfectant she'd seen in the basement. The boys were still asleep. Clarice approached the window and tried to open it, but it was locked. All the windows in the room were locked. "What are you doing?" Fernando stood in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled. "Good morning, Mr. Fernando. I was trying to open the window. They're locked. Security against intruders. The boys never get fresh air in here." Fernando frowned. "The air conditioning system constantly filters and purifies the air. It's cleaner than the air outside, but it's the same air, recycled continually." "What's your point, Clarice?" She hesitated. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground. Dr. Otavio had already warned her not to meddle. "Mrs. Elsa had said Fernando didn't like questions, but those 2 boys were wasting away, and no one seemed to be looking in the right direction. Mr. Fernando, can I be honest with you? I'd prefer you to be. I believe the boys are being exposed to something inside this house that's causing their symptoms. I don't know exactly what it is, but the signs are here. Their symptoms worsen in the morning, when they've just spent the whole night in the room. They improve when they go out. The windows are kept closed. The same air recycled all the time." Fernando watched her in silence for a long moment. "Dr. Otavio has already ruled out environmental factors. Dr. Otavio looked for mold, asbestos, lead, obvious things. But what about the chemicals used in cleaning? What about volatile compounds that can accumulate in enclosed environments?" Fernando ran a hand over his face. "Clarice, are you suggesting my own staff are poisoning my sons? Not intentionally, but sometimes people use products without knowing they can be dangerous, especially for children." Fernando ran a hand over his face again. The gesture of exhaustion Clarice knew well. Clarice, I appreciate your dedication, but you've been here a week. We've had specialists working on this case for over a year. I know, and I'm not saying I know more than them. I'm just saying maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Before Fernando could respond, a scream came from the boy's room. Clarice rushed in and found Miguel sitting in bed, shaking violently, his eyes rolling back in their sockets. Miguel! Miguel! Fernando was beside her in seconds. What's happening? It looks like a seizure. Call emergency. Fernando grabbed his phone while Clarice turned Miguel onto his side, protecting his head, doing everything she'd learned in her first aid courses. Rafael was awake now, crying in the corner of his bed. What's wrong with Miguel? He'll be okay, my love. He'll be okay. Rafael cried louder and louder, sobs shaking his small body. Miguel's going to die. Is he going to die like Mummy? No, darling. He's not going to die. We'll look after him. The seizure lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When Miguel finally stopped trembling, he was unconscious. His breathing was shallow, his face as pale as paper. Fernando was on the phone, shouting instructions to someone on the other end. Mrs. Elsa appeared in the doorway, her face white with fright. What happened? Call Dr. Ottavio, Fernando ordered. Tell him it's an emergency. As they waited for the ambulance, Clarice kept Miguel on his side, monitoring his breathing, speaking to him in a low voice, even knowing he probably couldn't hear. You'll be okay, my love. Clarice is here. Rafael had gotten out of bed and was clinging to her leg. Why is he like this? Miguel's body got confused. The doctors will help. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. The paramedics entered the room efficiently, but Clarice saw the concern in their eyes. How long has he been like this? The seizure lasted about 2 minutes. He lost consciousness as soon as it stopped. History of seizures? Fernando shook his head. Never. He's never had a seizure before. Any pre-existing medical conditions? He's been under investigation for over a year for an undiagnosed illness. Fatigue, muscle aches, weight loss. The paramedics exchanged a look Clarice didn't like. We'll take him to the hospital. You can accompany us, sir. Fernando looked at Clarice. You stay with Rafael? Of course. Go with him. As the paramedics placed Miguel on the stretcher, Rafael clung even tighter to Clarice's leg. I want to go with Miguel. You can't go, my love, but Daddy's going with him, and he'll call us with updates. Promise? I promise. Fernando leaned in and kissed Rafael's forehead. Daddy will bring Miguel back, okay? You stay here with Clarice, all right? As the ambulance left, Clarice stood on the veranda with Rafael in her arms, watching the red lights disappear down the street. The boy had stopped crying, but he was still trembling. Clarice? Hi, my love. Do you think Miguel will be okay? Clarice wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise everything would be fine, but she couldn't lie to this boy who'd already lost his mother and now saw his brother taken away in an ambulance. I think the doctors will do everything they can to help him. But you don't know if he'll get better? No one knows the future, Rafael. But I know one thing. What? That your brother is strong, and he has a lot of people who love him and want him to get better. Rafael nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Does Clarice love Miguel? The question caught Clarice by surprise. Yes, I do. Do you love him too? I love him a lot. Rafael rested his head on her shoulder. I love you too, Clarice. In that moment, holding that small, frightened boy, Clarice made a decision. She wouldn't wait anymore. She wouldn't stay silent. There was something wrong in that house that was killing those children, and she was going to find out what it was, even if it cost her job. Miguel's seizure wasn't just another symptom. It was a warning. Miguel spent 3 days in the hospital. Clarice looked after Rafael during that time, but her mind was constantly on the hospitalized boy and the theory forming in her head. Every night, after Rafael was asleep, she researched glutaraldehyde poisoning, volatile organic compounds, and the effects of chemicals on children. What she discovered chilled her. Prolonged exposure to glutaraldehyde could cause precisely the symptoms the twins presented. Chronic fatigue, muscle aches, neurological problems, weight loss. In severe cases, it could lead to seizures. And Miguel, who spent more time in his room than Rafael because he was more withdrawn, was receiving a higher dose. The theory made sense. Too much sense. But Clarice knew it wasn't enough to have a theory. She needed proof. On the 3rd day, Fernando brought Miguel back home. The boy was even paler, even weaker, with a hospital band on his wrist. Miguel, it's good you're back. The boy looked at her with empty eyes. Hi. Rafael ran to his brother and hugged him carefully, as if afraid of breaking him. I missed you, Miguel. Me too. Fernando looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. He had stubble, red eyes from lack of sleep, and an expression of defeat Clarice had never seen. The hospital doctors didn't find anything either, he said when the boys went to their room with Mrs. Elsa. They did every imaginable test. The seizure was classified as idiopathic, with no known cause. Mr. Fernando, no. Clarice, no. He held up a hand. I know what you want to say. I've seen it in your eyes since you arrived. You think you know something the doctors don't? I don't think I know more than the doctors. But I think I found something that deserves investigation. Fernando looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and desperation. What have you found? Clarice took a deep breath. It was now or never. The cleaning product used in this house, Formula Clean Pro, contains glutaraldehyde, a compound that can cause all the symptoms the boys have: fatigue, muscle aches, neurological problems. With prolonged exposure, it can cause seizures. Fernando remained silent for a long moment. How do you know this? I worked in a hospital years ago. Glutaraldehyde was used to sterilize equipment. Staff who were exposed developed health problems. After I found the product in the basement, I researched it. The symptoms are identical. And why didn't the doctors think of this? Because they were looking for diseases. They were looking for something inside the boys. They never thought to look for something in the environment. Fernando ran a hand over his face. Clarice, are you telling me that my own staff are poisoning my sons? Not intentionally. Mrs. Elsa probably doesn't know the product is dangerous. She's trying to keep the house clean, but the product is too strong for domestic use, and the boys spend hours in that room with the windows closed, breathing in the fumes. And why would Miguel be more affected than Rafael? Because Miguel spends more time in the room. He's more withdrawn, stays in bed more. Rafael tries to go out, play in the garden. He gets smaller doses. Fernando remained silent for so long that Clarice thought he was going to send her away, but then he did something she didn't expect. He sat in a chair and started to cry. I spent $3 million. I consulted the best doctors in the world. And you're telling me the answer was right under my nose the whole time? Clarice approached and knelt beside him. I could be wrong, but there's only one way to find out. How? By taking the boys out of this house for a few weeks. If they improve, we'll know it's something in the environment. If they don't improve, we go back to square one. Where would I take them? Anywhere. A hotel, a rented house, a relative's house. Anywhere that hasn't been cleaned with this product. Fernando wiped his eyes and looked at her. You really believe this? I believe it's worth a shot. Just then, the door opened, and Dr. Otavio entered, followed by Mrs. Elsa. Fernando, I came as soon as I heard Miguel was back from the hospital. The doctor stopped when he saw Clarice kneeling beside his boss. What's going on here? Fernando stood up. Clarice has presented me with an interesting theory. A theory? Dr. Otavio chuckled. The nanny's making diagnoses now? She thinks the boys are being poisoned by the cleaning product used in the house. The silence that followed was charged. Dr. Otavio looked from Fernando to Clarice, his expression shifting from disbelief to anger. This is absolutely ridiculous. You're going to believe a woman who probably hasn't even finished high school over me, who studied medicine for 8 years. Clarice stood up. I finished high school, doctor, and I also took courses in first aid, pediatric care, and environmental safety. I'm not a doctor, but I know how to recognize when something is wrong. And what exactly is wrong, in your professional opinion? The product Formula Clean Pro contains glutaraldehyde. It's an industrial disinfectant that shouldn't be used in domestic environments, much less children's bedrooms. Prolonged exposure causes fatigue, muscle aches, neurological problems, and seizures. Exactly the symptoms Miguel and Rafael present. Dr. Otavio laughed again, but there was something nervous in his laugh now. Fernando, I implore you not to take this seriously. This woman is clearly overstepping her bounds. Then prove me wrong, Clarice said, staring at the doctor. Do a toxicological test specifically for glutaraldehyde. If it's negative, I'll leave and never mention this again. I am not going to waste resources on conspiracy theories from a domestic employee. So you're afraid to find out, I'm right? Dr. Otavio's face turned red. How dare you? Enough. Fernando's voice cut through the air. Dr. Otavio, I want you to do the test Clarice is asking for. Fernando, this is absurd. I'm paying. I decide what's absurd or not. After everything I've done for you and your sons, you're going to believe this woman? Fernando approached the doctor. Otavio, you're an excellent doctor, but in over a year you haven't been able to figure out what's wrong with my sons. Clarice has been here a few weeks and already has a theory that makes sense. If she's wrong, nothing is lost. If she's right, my sons can finally get better. Dr. Otavio looked from Fernando to Clarice, anger practically radiating from his body. "Very well, I'll do the test, but when it comes back negative, I want this woman out of this house. If it's negative, I'll pack my own bags," Clarice said. "Excellent, we have a deal," the doctor stormed out. Mrs. Elsa, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, looked at Clarice with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I hope you know what you're doing, miss." "I hope so too, Mrs. Elsa." When they were alone, Fernando turned to Clarice. "Are you sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure we need to try something different. The traditional methods aren't working. And if you're wrong, then I'll leave, and you'll keep looking for answers." "And if you're right?" Clarice thought for a moment. "If I'm right, your sons will get better. And you'll have to accept that sometimes the most important answers come from the least expected people." Fernando looked at her for a long moment, and Clarice saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope, fragile, hesitant, but real. "Thank you, Clarice, for not giving up. I never give up on children who need me." That night, Clarice went to the boys' room to say goodnight. Miguel was lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, while Rafael played with some toy cars on the floor. "Hi, boys. I came to say goodnight." Rafael looked up. "Clarice, Daddy said we're going on a trip. Maybe. Daddy's still deciding. Where to? I don't know yet, but it'll be an adventure." Miguel turned in bed and looked at her. "I don't want to travel." "Why, my love?" "Because this is Mummy's house. If we leave, she won't know where we are." Clarice felt her heart ache. 5 years old, and that boy still expected his mother to return. "Miguel, your mummy will always know where you are, no matter where you go." "How?" "Because she lives here." Clarice touched her own chest. "In your heart, and your heart goes with you everywhere." Miguel was silent for a moment, processing the words. "Do you think Mummy's happy?" "I think she's very proud of you and your brother. And I think she wants you both to be well." "We're not well, I know, but we will be." "Promise?" Clarice hesitated. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep, but looking at that fragile boy, so small in that huge bed, she couldn't hold back. "I promise I'll do everything I can to make you well." And it was a promise she intended to keep, no matter the cost. The next 2 days were tense. Dr. Otavio had collected blood and urine samples from the boys for the toxicological tests, but the results would take at least 48 hours. Fernando had decided to follow her advice and rented a beach house 2 hours from the city. The idea was to take the boys there as soon as the results came out, regardless of what they showed. Clarice agreed. Even if the tests were negative, taking the children out of that environment could help. On the second night of waiting, Clarice was in the boys' room, helping Rafael draw while Miguel rested, when Mrs. Elsa appeared at the door. "Miss Clarice, I need to speak with you, privately." Clarice followed the housekeeper to the kitchen, where they found privacy. "What is it, Mrs. Elsa?" The older woman hesitated, her hands nervously clasped. "I need to tell you something about the cleaning product." Clarice felt her heart race. "What about it?" "I'm the one who chose that product. 2 years ago, when Mrs. Beatriz died, Mr. Fernando became obsessed with hygiene. He wanted the house to be impeccably clean, sterilized. He said he didn't want anyone else to get sick. And you chose an industrial disinfectant. I didn't know it was dangerous." Mrs. Elsa had tears in her eyes. "The salesman said it was the strongest on the market, that it killed all germs. I thought I was protecting the children." "Mrs. Elsa, you couldn't have known. But I should have researched. I should have read the labels more carefully." The housekeeper began to cry. "If I did this to those boys, if I made them sick." Clarice placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were trying to help. You had no way of knowing. You knew. You looked at the product and you knew. I was lucky enough to work in a hospital where they used glutaraldehyde. If it weren't for that, I never would have recognized it." Mrs. Elsa wiped her eyes. "If the tests prove you're right, I'll resign." "Don't do that. The boys need you. This house needs you. How can they trust me after what I did? You didn't do anything on purpose. And when Mr. Fernando discovers the truth, he'll understand that." Mrs. Elsa looked at her with an expression of gratitude mixed with guilt. "Why are you being so kind to me? I've been cold to you since you arrived." Clarice smiled slightly. "Because I know what it's like to carry guilt, and I know we do the best we can with the information we have." "You're a good person, Clarice. I'm just trying to help these children." When Clarice returned to the twins' room, she found Fernando sitting between the 2 beds, reading a story to the boys. It was a scene she hadn't seen before. The father dedicating exclusive time to his sons, his voice low and affectionate, the boys looking at him with adoration. She stood in the doorway, observing, feeling a wave of emotion. There was something profoundly beautiful in that scene, something that showed the man behind the businessman. Fernando looked up and saw her. Clarice, do you want to join us? I don't want to interrupt. You're not interrupting. I was reading their favorite part, the knight who saves the princess. Raphael looked at Clarice with excitement. Do you like stories? I love them. Then sit here. He patted the space beside him on the bed. Clarice sat down, and Fernando continued the story. It was a classic fairy tale, full of adventures and happy endings. But as she listened, Clarice thought that the real story of those boys had not yet found its happy ending. The test results arrived on a Thursday morning and changed everything. Clarice was in the kitchen having coffee when Fernando entered with an expression she'd never seen before. It was a mixture of relief, anger, and something like reverence. The tests came back positive, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Glutaraldehyde, elevated levels in both boys' blood. Miguel has concentrations 3 times higher than Raphael. Clarice felt her legs weaken. She was right. What does that mean? It means you saved my son's lives. Dr. Otavio appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression difficult to read. Fernando, we need to talk about these results. What's there to talk about? Clarice was right. Technically, yes. But I could never have predicted this. Glutaraldehyde isn't something you look for in routine tests. And why didn't you investigate when Clarice suggested it? Because it was an absurd theory, coming from someone with no medical qualifications. Dr. Otavio raised his voice. I have 25 years of experience. Fernando took a step towards the doctor. This nanny did in 2 weeks what you couldn't do in over a year. She got lucky, nothing more. Lucky? Clarice's voice was low, but firm. Do you call it luck when someone pays attention to details others ignore? Dr. Otavio looked at her with contempt. You're a lucky maid. That doesn't make you a doctor. I never said I was a doctor. I just said something was wrong. And it was. Fernando positioned himself between the two. Dr. Otavio, thank you for your services, but I don't think we need them anymore. You're firing me? I'm saying we'll find another professional. Dr. Otavio's face turned red with anger. You'll regret this, Fernando. I won't have to. I have someone who truly cares about them. Dr. Otavio stormed out, slamming doors. Mrs. Elsa, who had been silent throughout the argument, looked at Clarice with an expression she couldn't decipher. I hope you know what you're doing, miss. I hope so too, Mrs. Elsa. When they were alone, Fernando turned to Clarice. You're sure about this? No, but I'm sure we need to try something different. The traditional methods aren't working. And if you're wrong, then I'll leave, and you'll keep looking for answers. And if you're right, Clarice thought for a moment. If I'm right, your sons will get better. And you'll have to accept that sometimes the most important answers come from the least expected people. Fernando looked at her for a long moment, and Clarice saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope, fragile, hesitant, but real. Thank you, Clarice, for not giving up. I never give up on children who need me. That night, Clarice went to the boys' room to say goodnight. Miguel was lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, while Raphael played with some toy cars on the floor. Hi boys, I came to say goodnight. Raphael looked up. Clarice, Daddy said we're going on a trip. Maybe. Daddy's still deciding. Where to? I don't know yet, but it'll be an adventure. Miguel turned in bed and looked at her. I don't want to travel. Why, my love? Because this is Mummy's house. If we leave, she won't know where we are. Clarice felt her heart ache. 5 years old, and that boy still expected his mother to return. Miguel, your mummy will always know where you are, no matter where you go. How? Because she lives here. Clarice touched her own chest. In your heart. And your heart goes with you everywhere. Miguel was silent for a moment, processing the words. Do you think Mummy's happy? I think she's very proud of you and your brother, and I think she wants you both to be well. We're not well. I know, but we will be. Promise? Clarice hesitated. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep, but looking at that fragile boy, so small in that huge bed, she couldn't hold back. I promise, I'll do everything I can to make you well. And it was a promise she intended to keep, no matter the cost. The test results arrived on a Thursday morning and changed everything. Clarice was in the kitchen having coffee when Fernando entered with an expression she'd never seen before. It was a mixture of relief, anger, and something like reverence. The tests came back positive, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Glutaraldehyde, elevated levels in both boys' blood. Miguel has concentrations 3 times higher than Raphael. Clarice felt her legs weaken. She was right. What does that mean? It means you saved my son's lives. Dr. Otavio appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression difficult to read. Fernando, we need to talk about these results. What's there to talk about? Clarice was right. Technically, yes, but I could never have predicted this. Glutaraldehyde isn't something you look for in routine tests. And why didn't you investigate when Clarice suggested it? Because it was an absurd theory, coming from someone with no medical qualifications. Doctor. Otavio raised his voice. I have 25 years of experience. Fernando took a step towards the doctor. This nanny did in 2 weeks what you couldn't do in over a year. She got lucky, nothing more. Lucky? Clarice's voice was low, but firm. Do you call it luck when someone pays attention to details others ignore? Dr. Otavio looked at her with contempt. You're a lucky maid. That doesn't make you a doctor. I never said I was a doctor. I just said something was wrong, and it was. Fernando positioned himself between the two. Dr. Otavio, thank you for your services, but I don't think we need them anymore. You're firing me? I'm saying we'll find another professional. Dr. Otavio's face turned red with anger. You'll regret this, Fernando. I won't have to. I have someone who truly cares about them. Dr. Otavio stormed out, slamming doors. Fernando approached Clarice. You'll stay here, not as a nanny. As what? As part of this family. As someone I want present in my son's lives for a long time. Before she could answer, there was a commotion upstairs. Mrs. Elsa's voice calling out, and then a scream. Mr. Fernando, it's Miguel. He's not responding. Both ran upstairs. In the boys' room, Miguel was lying in bed, his eyes open, but fixed on nothing, his body completely still. I came in to wake them up, and he was like this, not responding to anything. Clarice touched the boy's forehead. It was cold and clammy. Miguel, can you hear me? No response. Call an ambulance, Clarice said to Fernando. Now, what's happening to him? It could be a reaction to the glutaraldehyde. It could be withdrawal. We need a hospital. Rafael was awake, huddled in the corner of his bed, his eyes full of terror. What's wrong with Miguel? Why isn't he talking? He'll be okay, my love. Daddy's calling for help. Fernando was on the phone, his voice urgent. Clarice kept her hand on Miguel's forehead, speaking to him in a low voice. Miguel, I know you're in there. You're strong, my love. The minutes felt like hours. Rafael clung to Clarice's leg, trembling. Mrs. Elsa prayed in silence. They said 10 minutes, Fernando murmured. It'll be enough time. What if it isn't? What if I lose him too? Clarice held Fernando by the shoulders. You won't lose him. Miguel is strong. And now we know what was wrong. You don't understand. When Beatriz died, I promised I'd look after them, that I'd never let anything bad happen. Fernando, you did everything you could. You spent fortunes, consulted specialists. You predicted. I was lucky to have the right experience at the right time. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. The paramedics rushed in, placed Miguel on the stretcher. He's in shock, one of them said. We need to go now. Fernando wanted to go with them, but Clarice held him back. Stay with Rafael. He needs you. But Miguel, I'll go with him. I'll stay until you get there. Clarice got into the ambulance as the doors closed. Are you the mother? A paramedic asked. I'm the nanny. What happened? Glutaraldehyde poisoning, prolonged exposure. Tests confirmed it this morning. Throughout the journey, Clarice held Miguel's hand. The boy remained motionless, but she felt his weak pulse. You'll be okay, my love. Clarice is here. At the hospital, Miguel was taken to the pediatric ICU. Clarice was stopped at the door and sat in a plastic chair, letting the tears fall. Fernando arrived 20 minutes later with Rafael in his arms. How is he? I don't know. They took him to the ICU. Rafael reached out his arms to Clarice. Is Miguel going to die? No, my love. Do you promise? Clarice looked at Fernando, whose eyes were full of tears. I promise. The doctors are doing everything they can. They waited 2 hours. Mrs. Elsa prayed. Fernando paced back and forth. Clarice held Rafael in her lap, singing softly. When the doctor appeared, everyone stood up. Almeida family. I'm the father. How is my son? Miguel suffered a severe withdrawal crisis. When the body is exposed to a toxin for a long time and then removed, there can be adverse reactions. The organism adapts to the presence of the substance, but he'll be fine. We've stabilized him. Now it's a matter of time. We need to do a gradual detoxification. How long? Weeks, maybe months. But the good news is that now we know what we're treating. Fernando sighed. Can I see him? Yes, but only one visitor at a time. Fernando looked at Clarice. You go first. Fernando, he's your son, and you saved his life. Go. Clarice entered the ICU with her heart in her throat. Miguel was in a small bed, surrounded by equipment. His eyes were open, and when he saw her, Something stirred in his expression. Clarice. His voice was weak, almost a whisper. Hi, my love. How are you? Tired. Where am I? In the hospital. You got sick, but the doctors are looking after you. I dreamt about Mummy. Clarice felt a pang in her chest. What did she say? She said I'd be okay, that there was someone new looking after me. Now Clarice couldn't hold back the tears. You'll be okay, Miguel, I promise. Are you the new person? I am. Then Mummy was right. Miguel closed his eyes, exhausted, but there was a small smile on his lips. And Clarice knew in that moment that no matter what came next, she had found her place in that family. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Miguel spent 10 days in the ICU before being transferred to a regular room. The doctors monitored his blood levels daily, adjusting treatments and medications as needed. The detoxification was slow, but working. Rafael visited his brother every day after school. Fernando had hired a tutor so he wouldn't miss classes, but insisted the boy could see Miguel whenever he wanted. Hi, Miguel, I brought you a drawing. Rafael showed a colorful piece of paper where he'd drawn 2 boys holding hands, a house, and a female figure beside them. Who's that? Miguel asked, pointing to the woman. That's Clarice. She's our family now. Clarice, who was standing at the door, felt her heart swell. Why did you draw her? Because she looks after us, and Daddy likes her a lot. Miguel looked at Clarice with those big, serious eyes. Do you like Daddy? The question was so direct, so typical of a 5-year-old, that Clarice didn't know how to answer immediately. I like your dad very much, and I like both of you very much. And does he like you? I think so. Miguel seemed satisfied with the answer. Mummy would like you too. She liked good people. Fernando appeared at the door at that moment, carrying a bag of fruit. What are you two talking about? About you and Clarice, Rafael said innocently. Miguel asked if you like each other. Fernando looked at Clarice, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart race. And what did Clarice say? She said she likes you. And you, Daddy? Do you like her? The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, Fernando smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. I like her very much. She saved your lives. So, she can be our new mummy? Rafael chimed in. Clarice's face turned red. What? We don't have a mummy, and you look after us just like a mummy. Miguel nodded. I think it's a good idea. Fernando approached Clarice, who was completely flustered. Looks like my sons have already decided. Fernando, they're children. They don't know what they're saying. Children often see things more clearly than adults. He took her hand. And what if I told you I agree with them? Clarice felt the air leave her lungs. What are you saying? I'm saying that in the last few weeks, you've become the most important person in my sons' lives. And to be honest, in my life too, you gave me hope when I had lost all of it. You saved my sons when no one else could, and you reminded me that there's still goodness in the world. Fernando, this is too fast. It is, but after losing Beatriz, I learned that life is too short to wait. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to give me a chance, to consider the possibility of truly being part of this family. Clarice looked at the 2 boys in the bed, who watched the scene with curious and hopeful eyes. She looked at Fernando, who looked at her with a vulnerability she'd never seen in him, and thought about everything that had happened since she got off that bus with a worn-out suitcase, looking at a mansion that seemed from another world. Yes, she said. Yes, I want to be part of this family. Rafael jumped from the chair. She said yes. Daddy, she said yes. Miguel smiled. The first genuine smile Clarice had seen in weeks. Now, we're a real family. Fernando hugged Clarice, and in that moment, in the hospital room, with 2 sick but recovering boys, something new began. It wasn't a happy ending yet, not quite. There was a long way to go, many difficulties to overcome, but it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was all you needed. That night, after the boys fell asleep, Clarice and Fernando sat in the hospital waiting room, side by side. You know it won't be easy, right? Clarice said. We still have a long way to go. Miguel needs months of treatment. Rafael will also need follow-up. And I'm not a doctor. I know, but you're more than any doctor could be to them. Fernando held her hand. You truly see them, not as patients or problems to solve. You see them as children who need love. They deserve all the love in the world. And you deserve to be loved too, Clarice. She looked at him, and for the first time since she had entered that mansion, she felt she no longer needed to prove herself, that she no longer needed to fight against distrust and prejudice, that she had found a place where she was valued for who she was, not for what she had or didn't have. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when no one else did. I thank you for not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away. I never gave up on a child who needed me, and I wasn't going to start with your sons." Fernando kissed her gently, a kiss that promised a future, a family, a new life. And as the night wore on and the hospital continued its silent rhythm of monitors and hurried footsteps, Clarice realized her life had completely changed. She had entered that house as a nanny desperate for a job and was leaving as part of a family. Mrs. Elsa was right. She had looked at those boys the right way, and they, without knowing it, had looked at her too. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, Clarice wasn't facing it alone. 6 months later, the Almeida mansion was unrecognizable. Not physically. The walls were still marble, the garden still impeccably manicured, the expensive paintings still on the walls, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where before there was silence and sadness, now there was laughter. Where before there was fear and despair, now there was hope and joy. Miguel and Rafael were fully recovered. The treatments had worked, the detoxification had been successful, and the boys were back to being what they should have been all along: healthy, energetic, full of life children. Clarice watched them play in the garden while having coffee on the veranda. They chased a ball, shouting and laughing. "What are you thinking about?" Fernando appeared behind her. "How much things have changed. 6 months ago, I was getting off a bus with a worn-out suitcase. And now you're part of this family." Clarice smiled. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "More certain than I've ever been about anything in my life. Today was the day." After 6 months of dating, of nights spent talking about the future, of family weekends, Fernando had asked Clarice to marry him. She had accepted without hesitation. The ceremony would be simple, just close family and friends in the mansion's garden. Clarice didn't want anything extravagant. After a lifetime of hardship, she had learned to value simple things. "Clarice, Clarice!" Rafael came running up to her, holding something in his hands. "Look what I found." It was a flower from the garden, a white rose he had carefully picked. "It's for you, to make you prettier for the wedding." Clarice felt her eyes well up with tears. "Thank you, my love. It's the most beautiful flower I've ever received." Miguel came right behind his brother. "I wanted to give you something too, but I couldn't find anything good. You being here, healthy and happy, is already the best gift I could receive. But that's not a real gift." "Of course it is. It's the most important gift of all." Fernando watched the scene with a smile. "Boys, why don't you go get ready? The ceremony starts in an hour." "Okay, Daddy." The two ran back into the house, leaving Clarice and Fernando alone again. "They adore you," Fernando said. "Sometimes I think they like you more than me." "That's not true. They love you, but you saved their lives. You were the person who saw what no one else saw. That creates a special bond. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, not anyone. You did it because of who you are, because you genuinely care, because you don't let prejudice or fear stop you from doing what's right." Clarice thought about Dr. Otavio, the disdain with which he had treated her, how he had dismissed her ideas simply because she didn't have a medical degree. She thought about all the times in her life she had been underestimated because of her humble origins. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What?" "That the most important answers don't always come from whom we expect. Sometimes they come from whom we least imagine, and it's worth listening, even when the person speaking doesn't have the right credentials." Fernando hugged her. "I'll try to always remember that." The ceremony was held at sunset, with the garden lit by hundreds of candles. Clarice wore a simple white dress she had chosen herself. Fernando wore a dark suit, but no tie, because he knew she preferred things more informal. Mrs. Elsa was in the front row, crying copiously. In recent months, she and Clarice had become unlikely friends. The housekeeper had never completely forgiven herself for the cleaning product, but Clarice had helped her understand that mistakes don't define a person. Miguel and Rafael were the groomsmen. They carried the rings on a velvet cushion, serious and concentrated, as if this were the most important mission of their lives. "Are you ready?" the celebrant asked Clarice. More than ever. The vows were simple, sincere, without unnecessary frills. Fernando promised to love and care for Clarice for all his life. Clarice promised to love and care for Fernando and the boys, as if they were her own flesh and blood. "Do you take Fernando as your husband?" "I do." "Do you take Clarice as your wife?" "I do." "Then I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was soft, full of promise. The boys applauded and cheered. Mrs. Elsa cried even more, and Clarice, for the first time in her life, felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The party continued into the night, but Clarice slipped away at some point to be alone in the garden. She needed a moment to absorb everything that had happened. "Can I join you?" It was Miguel, still dressed in his little groomsman's suit, his eyes tired but brighter. "Of course, my love. Come sit with me." He settled beside her on the garden bench. "Clarice, can I ask you something?" "You can." "Now that you've married Daddy, are you my real mummy?" Clarice felt her heart ache. It was a question she knew would come, but she hadn't expected it so soon. "I'll never replace your real mummy, Miguel. Beatriz will always be your mother, and you'll always be able to love her and remember her. But you look after us just like a mummy, yes, and I love you and Rafael, as if you were my own children. But love isn't a competition. You can love Beatriz and love me too. The heart has room for everyone." Miguel thought for a moment. "So I can call you Mummy?" Clarice felt tears streaming down her face. "If you want, you can call me whatever you like. I want to, because you're my mummy now. The mummy who looks after us here." He hugged her, and Clarice held him with all the strength she had. "I love you, Miguel. Very, very much. I love you too, Mummy." Rafael appeared running. "What are you doing?" "Miguel's telling me a secret." "What secret?" Miguel looked at Clarice with a smile. "That Clarice is our mummy now." Rafael's eyes widened. "Really? Can I call you Mummy too?" "You can, Mummy." Rafael jumped into Clarice's lap. "I always wanted to have a mummy again." Fernando appeared in the garden, probably looking for them. "I found you. What's going on here?" "Daddy, Clarice is our mummy now," Rafael announced. "She said we can call her that." Fernando looked at Clarice, who had tears in her eyes but was smiling. "Is that true? And if you don't mind," "Mind, Clarice. This is all I ever wanted for them, a mother who truly loved them." He joined them on the bench, and the four of them embraced under the stars, an improbable family brought together by destiny. "You know what I was thinking?" Clarice said after a while. "What?" "That there should be a way to help other families who are going through the same thing you went through. Sick children, desperate parents, doctors who can't find answers." Fernando looked at her with interest. "What do you have in mind?" "A foundation. Some kind of organization that helps investigate unresolved medical cases, especially those where environmental factors might be the cause. That would be incredible. We could call it the Second Chance Foundation, because sometimes all a family needs is someone to look at the problem from a different angle. I like it, and I have the resources to make it happen. Would you do this, Clarice? You saved my son's lives. If you want to save the lives of other children, I'll do everything in my power to help." And so, on that wedding night, not only a family was born, but a mission, a foundation that, in the years that followed, would help hundreds of families find answers that traditional doctors couldn't provide. An organization that valued careful observation, patient listening, and the courage to ask questions others were afraid to ask. Clarice looked at Fernando, at Miguel, at Rafael, and knew that this was just the beginning. There was a lot of work to do, many families to help, many children to save, but she was no longer alone. She had a family now, a family that loved her, that respected her, that believed in her. And that, in the end, was all she had ever wanted. 2 years later, the Almeida mansion was flourishing. Not physically, the marble walls remained, the gardens still impeccably maintained, the expensive paintings still adorned the walls, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Where before there had been silence and sorrow, now there was laughter. Where before there had been fear and despair, now there was hope and joy. Miguel and Rafael, now 7, were completely healthy. They attended school normally, played, and made mischief. The nightmare of their illness seemed distant. One Sunday afternoon, as the family had a picnic in the garden, Rafael came running with a letter in his hand. "Mummy, Mummy, a letter for you." Clarice took the envelope and immediately recognized the sender. It was from the Regional Medical Council. "What's that?" Fernando asked. "I don't know. Let me open it." The letter was short, but significant. The council was granting Clarice an honorary certification as an environmental health consultant in recognition of her pioneering work in identifying environmental causes of pediatric diseases. "This is incredible, Clarice. I don't believe it." She looked at the letter, her hands trembling. "After everything, doctor, Otavio said about me not having qualifications. You showed him. You showed everyone." Miguel approached and looked at the letter with curiosity. "What does that mean, Mummy?" "It means people are recognizing the work I do. Like an award. Sort of. Cool. You deserve an award." Clarice hugged the boy, thinking about how it had all begun. A resignation letter from her last family. An urgent vacancy in a millionaire's mansion. 2 sick boys no one could cure. And now a family, a purpose, a recognition she had never sought, but which meant everything. "You know what I love most about you," Fernando said. "That you never lost your humility. Because this is who I am. and I won't forget where I came from." The boys ran off to play, and Fernando and Clarice sat on the grass. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." "Really, Fernando? I grew up without family. I lost my parents young. I was raised by relatives who saw me as a burden. I worked my whole life looking after other people's children, knowing I'd never have my own. And now, look at me." She gestured to the boys, to the house, to everything around them. "I have 2 children who call me mummy. I have a husband who loves and respects me. I have a job that makes a difference in people's lives. How could I not be happy?" Fernando kissed her softly. "You deserve all this happiness and more." That night, after the boys had gone to sleep, Clarice went out onto the veranda and looked at the stars. She thought of Beatriz, the woman she had never known, but whose presence was still felt in that house. She thought of the boys she loved as her own. She thought of all the families the foundation had helped and would continue to help. And she thought of herself, the poor girl who had grown up believing she would never be anything more than a maid, the woman who had discovered that value is not measured by diplomas or social positions, but by the ability to see what others don't and the courage to act when others give up. Fernando appeared beside her. "What are you thinking about?" "How a single question can change everything." "What question?" "The one I asked Dr. Otavio about the cleaning products. It seemed so simple, so obvious, but it was the question no one else had asked. Sometimes the simple questions are the most powerful." "Yeah, sometimes they are." They stood in silence for a moment, appreciating the night. "Clarice?" "Yes, thank you." "Why?" "For everything, for my sons, for my life, for showing me that there are still good people in the world." Clarice smiled. "Thank you for giving me a family." And as the stars shone above them, Clarice knew she had found her place in the world, not as the nanny who entered through the back door, but as the woman who saved an entire family, simply by having the courage to ask the right questions. The millionaire had paid fortunes to cure his children, but the cure came free, offered by someone who had nothing but observant eyes and a heart willing to see. And that, in the end, was the greatest lesson of all. If this story touched something inside you, leave a comment. Sometimes, acknowledging what we feel changes more than we imagine. Your comment might help someone who is silent today.